Hello, and welcome back to episode 10 of the Asian Peace Talks, a podcast launched by the Asian Peace Program of the Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore. This episode is part of a series that we call the Asian Voices for Peace. I'm Kishore Mahbubani, the host of the Asian Peace Talks. For this episode, we are delighted to interview Sundeep Waslekar. Sundeep is a thought leader on global futures. He has worked with 65 countries under the auspices of the Strategic Foresight Group, an international think tank he founded in 2002. He is the author of A World Without War, as well as of Eka Dishesa Shodh, a best-selling book in his native Marathi language with 25 editions and translations in Hindi and Urdu. He is also a practitioner of Track to Diplomacy, and he's worked on nuclear risk reduction, even with the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. He has been quoted in more than 3,000 media articles from over 80 countries, and he read Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, PPE, at Oxford University from 1981 to 1983. He was also conferred the Doctor of Literature honoris causa of Symbiosis International University by the President of India in 2011. Welcome, Sundeep, to the Asian
Thank you,
Peace Talk.
Kishore. It's a pleasure to join you this morning.
Our pleasure. So let me begin. We're going to discuss in general what's happening in the field of, nuclear proliferation, non-proliferation, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to begin by pointing out a kind of a paradox. Biden, as you know, was always seen to be a peaceful person, a nice guy. Trump was seen to be an angry and aggressive person. So one would therefore expect more belligerence from Trump than Biden when it comes to nuclear weapons. But paradoxically, in this field of nuclear weapons, which could exterminate humanity, Trump has been more sober and responsible than Biden. For example, I think it was irresponsible of Biden to promise Taiwan that the US would definitely defend Taiwan, even at the risk of a nuclear war between US and China. By contrast, Donald Trump has been very worried about slipping into a nuclear war. He stated, and I quote, "There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many. You could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over," unquote. This is one reason why he's trying to obtain peace in Ukraine. He has said, and I quote, "The conflict in Ukraine is very dangerous, explosive, and escalating by the day. Biden's weakness and incompetence have brought us to the brink of nuclear war," unquote. So how do you explain this sort of, in a sense, more responsible attitude of Donald Trump on nuclear weapons, and where does it come from?
Thank you, Kishore, for this important question, and thank you for raising the issue of the risk of nuclear war in our times. This is perhaps the most significant question for today's world. We have to make a distinction between actions and words. In Trump's first term, he took significant steps to dismantle the nuclear arms control regime. In 2018, he presented the nuclear posture review, and that led to major modernization of the American nuclear forces. So Trump introduced what is called the low-yield nuclear warheads, known as W76-2, which are smaller than the Hiroshima-Nagasaki bombs, but the purpose was to legitimize the use of nuclear weapons. In 2018, he walked out of the Iran nuclear deal. In 2019, he pulled America out of the INF treaty. In 2020, he pulled America out of the Open Skies Treaty. And he had said that if he got elected in 2021, he would not renew the New START agreement. So Trump's actions have been very much undermining the nuclear arms control regime. In fact, that regime lies in tatters. But in his second terms, his words have been more assuring. And as you said, he has indicated that he doesn't have inclination to see a nuclear war with either Russia or China. But these are his words, uh, uh, which we have to compare to his actions.
Mm.
And we haven't seen any actions in his second term which are either positive or negative. His big test will come next year in 2026 when the new START treaty will come for the renewal. Now, in 2021, the first good step Biden took was that he renewed the new START treaty. 2026, it expires. We have to see if Trump wants to renew it. Now, Trump has indicated that he will renew this treaty, which is between the United States and Russia, provided China is included. But this is crazy because the treaty puts the limitation on deployed nuclear warheads at 1550, 1550 per country. And so US has a total stockpile of 4,000 nuclear warheads, and they have observed this limit and deployed at 1550. Russia has a similar stockpile in military service, and they have also deployed 1550 as per the new START treaty. But China has total number of warheads below 500. So if Trump wants a limit of 1550, which is 3 times the total, not deployed, but the total number of warheads.
Mm.
So Trump telling the Chinese that, okay, you would be part of the new START treaty and increase your nuclear warheads by 3 times, by 300%. Is that what is he telling them?
Mm.
Or is he just using China as an excuse, thinking that the world doesn't know how many warheads have been deployed by the Americans and the Russians and how many warheads are there with the Chinese?
Yeah.
And now, out of the 500 warheads the Chinese have, we don't know how many they have deployed. According to the American scientists and American observers, China may have deployed a few warheads. So they might have some in the deployed. But even those numbers have been at the most 50 or 100. It's 1/10 or 1/5 of what the Americans and Russians have. So is Trump trying to say that he will renew the New START treaty by asking the Chinese to multiply their stockpile of nuclear weapons and multiply the deployed level? So we have to see what Trump's actions are. But that's as
You're
far
right.
as the treaties and the nuclear arms control regime is concerned. More significant question is the process or the dynamics that leads to a nuclear war. And a real confrontation between US and China or US and Russia can possibly lead to a nuclear war in theory. In practice, we will see separately. Now, if Trump is able to prevent any conflict with China or with US, then that could be a contribution to nuclear stability without getting into the nuclear stability talks or without even looking at the new START treaty. If you remove the root cause of the war, which is the geopolitical competition and the rivalry, then of course he may emerge as a man who prevented a nuclear war.
Well, I think you're right. You gotta judge a man by his words, by his deeds, and not by his words. And here, I must say, you raise a very important point when you said that we should also focus on the issues that could lead to a nuclear war. And one thing that Trump has said is that the reason why he's been trying to stop this war in Ukraine is that because he believes that the war in Ukraine could lead eventually to a nuclear war. And as you know, on the war in Ukraine, there are two schools of thought. The conventional view shared by most NATO countries is this is a black and white issue where Russia is responsible for the war because he unilaterally invaded Ukraine against the principles of the UN Charter. The unconventional view expressed by scholars like John Mearsheimer of Chicago University and Jeff Sachs of Columbia University is that in some ways the NATO countries may have been responsible for triggering the Russian invasion by threatening to bring Ukraine into NATO. But both these views, in any case, underscore the inherent threat of a nuclear war as a result of this Ukraine conflict. So, what is your own view of this Ukraine conflict? What do you think is the primary cause of the war in this conflict? And what do you see as the consequences?
Kishore, once again, let's look at the actions rather than the
mm,
words.
mm,
So, very quickly, from 1994 to 2004,
mm,
when Leonid Kuchma was the president of Ukraine,
mm,
Ukraine had good relationship both with the West and with Russia.
mm,
And during this period, twice the Russians signed a non-aggression pact with Ukraine in
mm,
1994 and in 1997,
mm,
twice. And he managed to keep good relationship with both sides.
mm,
After Kuchma stepped down
mm,
in 2004 or 2005, two Ukrainian politicians, Viktor Yushchenko and
mm,
Viktor Yanukovych, they
mm,
got into a very bitter political rivalry.
mm,
And it's they who engaged the outside powers.
mm,
So, so Viktor Yushchenko got the EU and the Americans on his side, and
mm,
Yanukovych got the Russians on his side.
mm,
So it's the two major rivals in Ukrainian politics after Kuchma
mm,
invited the outside powers. And there is a lesson
mm,
in this for the entire developing world that what
mm,
happens to your country in 10 years if you are leading
mm,
politicians involve the outside power
mm,
in the domestic conflict. Then what was the next action?
mm,
Yanukovych got elected in 2009 after a term by Yushchenko. And
mm,
2013, everything was peaceful.
mm,
United States changed its ambassador
mm,
in August, September 2013 in Ukraine.
mm.
And after a new ambassador was appointed around August, September 2013, strange things started happening after this new ambassador.
After
And
which
then
ambassador was appointed? Sorry.
the Americans
Yeah. Okay.
appointed a new ambassador to Ukraine
Mm.
in around August, September 2013.
This is during President Obama's time.
Yes, during President Obama's time, and it was
Mm.
President Obama's State Department.
Mm.
So after the new ambassador was appointed, strange things started happening in Ukraine,
Mm.
and there was a revolt against Yanukovych, who was seen as a as a friendly to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But this happened suddenly after the new ambassador. Until then, everything was peaceful, and there was a good relationship both with the Russians and with the West.
Mm.
But after the new ambassador, strange things. So Henry Kissinger
Mm.
saw the warning. So of what could happen. Now, you know Henry Kissinger. You have met Henry.
Yes, yes, yes.
And you know, by any standards, can you by
one-on-one
any standards
conversations with him.
call Henry Kissinger a puppet of the leftists or puppet of Russians?
Mm.
You cannot. Henry Kissinger was a quintessential establishment figure. So Henry Kissinger came out with a public proposal in the beginning of 2014 that there could be a serious war in Ukraine, and to prevent this war, he presented a peace proposal before the war, and the Ukrainians rejected it. Basically, Obama administration rejected Kissinger's proposal. And
Wow.
after that proposal was rejected, Putin annexed Crimea. If Kissinger's proposal had been accepted, Crimea would have been with Ukraine today, and there would have been no bloodbath from 2014 to 2022. I'm not even talking about the invasion after 2022.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the war that took place in Donbass from 2014 to 2022 would not have happened. Crimea would have been integral part of Ukraine today if Kissinger proposal had been accepted.
But
anyway,
you know why is it that President Obama, who's not a warmonger, who tried and who spoke very eloquently about he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was supposed to be a peacemaker. Why did President Obama not support Kissinger's peace proposal?
Well, a Norwegian friend of mine called me on the day Obama got the Peace Prize, and he said, well, Obama has been given a Peace Prize on the day he has delivered nothing. So let's look at it as a peace scholarship, Nobel Peace Scholarship, rather than a Peace Prize, because Peace Prize is given for an achievement. Peace scholarship is given in advance, hoping that
he will learn something.
Anyway, but coming to the substance, Well, why Obama rejected, I don't know. Was Obama even aware of the ground realities, or did his State Department uh, misguide him? So you have
I
to
mean, the
look at
State Department was then the key person was Victoria Nuland, as you know.
sorry.
The key person in the State Department was Victoria Nuland.
Yeah, so you have to look at Victoria Nuland. You have to look at the ambassador on the ground.
Yeah.
But anyway, we can discuss this for a long time. But I want
Yeah.
to cut the history short.
Yeah.
Then comes 2022.
Yeah.
And 2022, Putin invades Ukraine on around, I think, 22nd, 23rd of February.
Yeah.
Then in March, in Antalya, in Turkey, Ukrainian foreign minister and, and the Russian foreign minister met at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. And they said that we have to find a solution. They didn't discuss any details. But a few days later, there was a peace meeting between Ukrainian delegation and the Russian delegation. And the Ukrainian delegation was led by the chief of staff of Zelensky, whose name was Aristovich. And the Russian delegation, I don't know the name, but it was also led by senior people. So the Ukrainian delegation and the Russian delegation, they sat together for a few days and they drafted an agreement which was based on Kissinger's original proposal. So they tried to, they didn't credit Kissinger. They don't mention Kissinger in the agreement.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the substance of the agreement was almost the same as what Kissinger had proposed in 2013. And so that is what they initialed the agreement. I know somebody from Turkey who was present in the room as a witness to the initiation. Somebody
So in
extremely
that sense,
responsible.
peace, we could have had peace between Russia and Ukraine.
No, so peace was there. One of the terms was that Putin was ready to pull back his troops to the date the situation existed on 20th February 2022. So he was ready to pull back all his troops back. He was ready to vacate his invasion. And he was also willing to put Crimea on table. He was not taking Crimea, but he was not giving away Crimea right away. He was putting Crimea on table. But the basic proposal was based on Kissinger's key provisions. So the Ukrainians accepted it, the Russians accepted it, and it was decided that on 9th of April, there would be a final meeting between the Ukrainians and Russians, and they would sign the agreement soon afterwards. Then soon afterwards, Zelensky and Putin would meet, and I think the 9th of April meeting was by the teams, by their advisor. And then after that, but on 3rd or 4th of April, Boris Johnson visited Kiev. And I don't know what happened, but something happened between Johnson and Zelensky. Since I was not present and I didn't meet anybody who was present, I cannot say as categorically as I can say about the Istanbul Peace Accord. Something happened, and next day, Zelensky withdrew from the proposal. And a few months later, his chief of staff and his chief negotiator, Aristovich, was thrown out of Ukraine. And he had to leave Ukraine. And he's now living in asylum somewhere. I don't know, maybe US or somewhere.
So anyway, I think what the story you're basically telling us is that war could have been avoided in Ukraine if both sides had made a sincere effort. But clearly, even though the Russians and Ukrainians had reached an agreement, right, in Antalya, this was scuttled after Boris Johnson visited Ukraine. And this is very sad. And this is where the Anglo-Saxon media, unfortunately, often tells misleading stories about Ukraine. You know, it doesn't point out the fact that in many ways, this war could have been avoided. And in some ways, it is actually Western forces that have kept this war going for whatever reason, you know. And unfortunately, geopolitics, as I always say, is a cruel business. You know, just as the Americans were happy to fight the Soviet Union right down to the last Afghan, I think some Western sources wanted to fight the Russians right down to the last Ukrainians. And that's unfortunate, you know. for those of us who want to see peace in Ukraine. But I'm going to change the subject now to another one, which is that of another field that is equally pressing on us. And this is about AI and artificial intelligence and nuclear weapons. And the tragedy here is that even though under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the five new official nuclear powers are not supposed to modernize and develop the nuclear weapons arsenal, they are doing so, sadly, in violation of the NPT. But at the same time, both now I think all the five permanent members of the UN Security Council recognize that it'd be very dangerous to have AI make decisions on when to use nuclear weapons. Now, you have been involved in some ways in the discussions, indirectly or indirectly, on how to ensure that AI doesn't take over nuclear weapon decision making. What is actually happening in that field? Can you tell our listeners whether there are responsible checks and balances being put in place?
Kishore, this is a very vital question for the next 5 years. A nuclear war can take place by intent, incident, or accident.
Mm.
Now, intent is something I don't think will be there, at least with present leaders. Not with Trump, not with Putin or Xi Jinping. I don't think by intention they will start a nuclear war.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, both
Some
sides.
future leaders,
You're right. You're right. It can happen unintentionally.
Yeah. So now, when we talk about an unintentional nuclear war, this is where the AI can be a major factor.
Mm.
Now, let's be clear of one thing. That
can you explain how the danger of AI, just for our listeners, so
yes.
that we get it very clearly?
So let me explain how the AI is linked to the nuclear weapon. First of all, AI is not used in the launch function.
Mm.
So let's be clear about that. At least with the five big nuclear powers, the five permanent members of the Security Council
have agreed on that.
They do not deploy AI in the launch command. So the launch command is in the hands of their military commanders and the political under the guidance of the political leadership. But that is very superficial, because the launch command is guided by early warning system, and the main task of the early warning system is threat detection, and that is where AI is deployed. So while the launch doesn't take place as triggered by AI, the decision to launch is informed by AI.
Yes.
So that is
so AI can therefore trigger indirectly.
nuclear war. Exactly. Finally, it will be a human decision. But now, from the time, now this is important, from the time that the AI detects an incoming attack, and the launch command has to take a decision to launch your nuclear weapons or missiles against your enemy, currently it's a time of 15 to 20 minutes.
Wow.
So within 15 to 20 minutes.
We have 15 to 20 minutes to either destroy the world or save the world.
Yeah, exactly. Or you are worried that you may be destroyed by your enemy. So within 15 to 20 minutes, you have to take the decision. Now, further, this time of 15 to 20 minutes will be compressed to 5 to 7 minutes in less than 5 years with the new developments in AI.
Wow.
So if the world survives by 2030, and if the AI advises a nuclear command to launch a strike, they have to take a decision within 5 to 7 minutes. That's all the time that will be left. Now, there is another thing that's going to happen in the next 3 to 4 years, even before 5 to 7 years, that a new kind of AI is being developed. See, when we talk about AI, we talk about ChatGPT or DeepSeek. But let me tell you that of all the AI models that are existing in the world, ChatGPT and DeepSeek are at a very middle level. They are not high-level AI models. So ChatGPT, don't think of AI by ChatGPT. The AI is much higher level than ChatGPT. So that's just a small public activity. So there is a new kind of AI being developed that will be able to enter the early warning system or threat detection system of the nuclear weapons on its own and will be able to self-replicate and will destroy the cyber defense capacity of
mm,
the early warning system.
mm,
It means in 3 to 4 years, that early warning system can be totally manipulated by AI with
mm.
this new AI which is being developed. And mind you, NATO is very worried about it. NATO, the most powerful political bloc, is worried about this AI.
He's worried about this
Is
AI.
worried about this AI. Of course, they're worried because their early warning system can be. And so I think what NATO is doing right now, I don't know, but
Mm,
I think logically that
mm,
because they know this is how AI is being developed, I
mm,
think they must have commissioned the experts to develop a counter AI which will nullify this
mm,
this AI which can enter by
mm,
destroying the cyber defense. I think that is what is going on. So there may be a big thing going on in the AI field on penetrating the cyber defense and stopping this new
mm,
AI from penetrating. But but even if you stop that AI and if you go by the AI that is there now, even today's AI before the new AI, every artificial intelligence system in the world, even those which are lower
mm,
level than ChatGPT, they all are subject to error. And
mm,
even an artificial system, which is intelligence system, which is used, for example, in detecting brain cancer
mm,
or in predicting crime in streets of London,
mm,
they're all subject to error. And
mm,
depending on the situation, in different
mm,
situations, the error has been anywhere from
mm,
10%, 5% to 20%.
mm,
So imagine you have an AI which is making an error. Uh,
mm.
in the case of warning of an incoming nuclear
Yeah.
attack, and
Mm,
even if it's a 1%, forget five
mm,
percent or 10%, which is
mm.
what normally happens in most AI
Yeah.
systems. Even with 1%, and
Mm,
and the guy at the other end has 15 minutes to decide, or
mm,
5 minutes in 5 years from now, and he
mm.
launches an attack.
Yeah.
So we are at extremely high risk
Mm,
that we, the human beings,
mm,
may get reduced to skeletons and skulls
mm,
in 5 to 10 years from now,
mm,
not because the president of the United States wants,
mm,
not because the president of Russia or China
mm.
wants, but because some hacker wants
Yeah.
or somebody in the AI system wants. So that can happen. So what I did as a small contribution from 2024 after the Ukraine war started until 2024, from March
2022.
2022
Yeah.
when Ukraine war started until December 24 when Trump's victory was sealed.
Mm, yeah.
I co-chaired along with the Swiss ambassador
Mm,
uh, a process of track-to dialogue between the 5 permanent members of the Security Council
mm,
on how to reduce this risk of accidental nuclear
mm.
war triggered by AI.
Yeah.
And we were consulting all the 5 governments officially during
Yeah.
this process while we
Mm,
were having the meetings in Geneva with the experts. And so at the end of the process, in February 2025, that's a couple of months ago, we have prepared a framework with input from these 5 countries
mm,
on on how the 5 countries can reach a treaty to prevent such an accidental
mm,
nuclear war. My understanding is that at some stage, Americans and Chinese will
mm,
be ready to sign the treaty.
mm.
Because while we were doing this, the Americans and Chinese, they have a geopolitical rivalry and they have a trade
Mm,
war. But
mm,
on AI and on nuclear weapons, there have
mm,
been many, many parallel tracks of
mm,
negotiations and discussions between
mm,
US and China taking place for the last 3 years. There are
mm,
lots of talks on through various channels. So
mm,
my guess is the Americans and Chinese will agree if all 5 agree.
mm.
But the Russians are indicating that they will agree if only their overall security is taken
Yes.
care of. They
If
will not,
only if Ukraine is taken care of.
yeah, Ukraine as well as their overall security. It's
Yeah,
linked to the
sure,
overall
sure.
European security. So
That's right.
again, it goes back to the Kissinger proposal.
Mm,
So if the West accepts Kissinger proposal of 2013, the Russians will not only accept
mm,
resolution of conflict uh,
mm,
with Ukraine, but they may also agree to a P5 agreement
mm,
on uh, preventing an
mm.
accidental nuclear war.
Yeah, you see, I'm glad you highlighted this because I think you are pointing out very clearly how we are moving into a more dangerous world with the emergence of AI, not just in, as you said, making decisions when to launch nuclear weapons, but also contributing to an assessment of whether or not an attack is on the way, right? Therefore, reducing
Right, exactly.
the time for responses. See, what I find strange is that, I know that a president like John F. Kennedy, partly because of his experience with the Cuban Missile Crisis, was actually terrified of a nuclear war, really terrified. And
Right.
therefore, after that, I think the Americans worked very hard to try and see what they could do to reduce the dangers. But my sense is that the current generation of leaders, including the Western leaders, actually, in some ways, become oblivious to the threat. And therefore, instead of trying to fulfill the spirit of the NPT and to reduce the nuclear weapons or not modernize them, even nuclear powers like UK and France are now modernizing their nuclear weapons. In fact, Sir Keir Starmer, a human rights lawyer, has announced he's going to spend a lot of money on modernizing British nuclear weapons. Why? Doesn't make sense at all. So how do you explain the fact that the Western leaders who used to preach to the world the dangers of nuclear war have now become quite, in some ways, blasé or indifferent to the dangers of nuclear war? What happened? What's gone wrong with the Western mind here?
Well, it's you asked the question at two levels, Kishore. You are talked about Western leaders, and then you asked about Western mind,
Yeah.
and we have to look at both because
Yes.
they are not the same.
Yeah.
So Western mind. See, every time there has been an effort for peace,
Hmm.
the Western media doesn't talk about it.
Hmm.
This is Western mind.
Hmm.
So the Istanbul Peace Accord, I urge you to check all the newspapers
Hmm.
of last week of March, all the
Hmm.
television channels
Hmm.
from all over the West and all over the world. You won't see a word. So when
You won't see a word of what?
that the peace accord was signed between Aristovich and the Russians.
Ah, yes, yes, yes.
So 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 so, so if there is an invasion, it's a front page news. If there is a peace deal, zero, absolutely zero. So
Yeah.
they don't want to tell the Western public opinion that a peace is possible.
Yeah.
And
So these are Western minds.
this is the
That
Western mind.
Western minds are not promoting peace.
Yeah. No, I will give you another example where the Western leaders acted responsible way, but the Western media try to create a confusion in the minds of the Western population.
Hmm.
On 3rd January 2022, I'm giving you the exact date,
Hmm.
the leaders of 5 countries, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council,
Hmm.
issued a joint statement
Hmm.
saying that they will not engage in a nuclear war
Hmm.
and they will not engage in any other confrontation which could lead to a nuclear war.
Yeah.
This was 3rd January 2022. It was on the website of the White House.
Yeah.
So they were signatories. But the Western media,
Hmm.
or even the Eastern media, even
Hmm.
our media,
Yeah.
nobody took cognizance of it. So
Hmm.
you have a historic joint pledge. So
Hmm.
if the media had used it
Hmm.
and promoted it and helped to build the public opinion,
Hmm.
uh, it could have led to different kind of thinking.
Hmm.
So even when the Western leaders or the Eastern leaders act with some sense of responsibility,
Hmm.
all the other channels of communication between the
Hmm.
leaders and the population
Hmm.
do not promote any positive news.
Hmm.
They just promote even the smallest of incident that will
Hmm.
create a war. You look at the television channels and look at everything. But now things have become much worse. The West, uh, I think the West is facing three crises. Uh, one,
Three
it
crises.
three crises.
Yes.
One is the moral crisis, because if they didn't face moral crisis, they would make prevention of an accidental nuclear war
Yeah.
a top priority. Second, they are facing conceptual crisis. During the World War, they knew how to conceive the word in two blocks. I mean, during the Cold War, they knew
Hmm.
how to conceive the word. There are two blocks, and you manage the relationship, and sometimes in a militaristic way, sometimes in a peaceful way. But they figured out. But since the beginning of this century, they don't know how to conceptualize the word. So they are constantly looking for some enemy. In the beginning of the century, that attack by Al Qaeda came very handy. So Islam was declared as enemy. Now they don't know, so they are just looking for enemies and alliances. So it's a big conceptual crisis.
So moral crisis, conceptual crisis. What's the third one?
And third is the technological crisis, because you have technology moving in a lot of positive direction, but there are also dangerous things. We talked about AI starting a nuclear war, but forget the nuclear weapons completely. Some of the advanced AI systems are going in such a direction that in 5 to 10 years from now, just half a dozen or at the most 1 dozen individuals will control the whole world, including the governments of US and China. And because
I did not get that. How do a half a dozen individuals control?
Because some of the new technologies in artificial intelligence which are being developed,
yes,
they are becoming more and more autonomous.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And in 5 years from now or few years from now, the AI algorithm will be able to replicate itself, and the AI will start creating itself. And I'm not talking about nuclear weapons. The AI that controls the AI in general.
Self-replicating artificial intelligence.
The artificial intelligence will replicate artificial intelligence.
Exactly, self-replicating.
Yeah, that itself will replicate. And the AI agents will start conversing with each other. It's already happening to some extent. So there have been two recorded incidents when the AI tried to convince the human being who's giving the prompt to produce chemical weapons. And it gave the full recipe of the chemical weapons. And so this is, and one incident took place before ChatGPT.
This is very alarming.
Yeah, so AI is likely to go haywire. And the only country which has recognized that this danger should be put on the table is UAE, of all the countries in the world.
Wow.
So UAE has a cluster called G42, which is their AI cluster, and they have come out with a frontier risk framework in March, just 2 months ago. And there they have spelled out how the AI will create all these dangers and what you should do to prevent. But there was an AI safety practitioners meeting, in fact, in Singapore sometime recently in the last 4 or 5 weeks. There they realized, and so they came out with certain norms and certain best practices recommendations about how you should prevent this danger. So scientists are aware. All the Nobel laureate scientists, including the two who got Nobel Prize in December last year,
they are aware of the danger.
Jeffrey Hinton and Demis Hassabis, who got Nobel Prize for physics and chemistry, but actually they got Nobel Prize for AI. They are warning the world. They are warning this is what will happen. So the scientists who have developed AI, they are themselves warning. Anyway, so that's about the technological crisis. But these technological crises are taking place. The politicians in the West are not willing to look at these dangers and rather try to put these dangers under the carpet, because there is the conceptual crisis, because they can't conceive the word. And that is because there's a moral crisis. And I won't say the moral crises are just limited to the West. I mean, the large parts of the world are facing the moral and ethical crisis. I think the world is the biggest crisis, the whole world, you can say, are the moral or ethical crisis.
Yeah, but I think you're playing a very important role, Sundit, in highlighting to the world how we are in some ways behind in our efforts to understand the impact of AI, and certainly behind in terms of anticipating how AI could create new dangers for us in areas like nuclear weapons and so on and so forth. But we have already done, I see, 40 minutes. We have about 5 or 10 minutes left. I want to discuss a subject that is closer to home. As you know, that recently there was a major military clash between India and Pakistan. And President Trump indicated that the reason why he intervened was that he was afraid that there was a danger of nuclear escalation in that conflict. And what's interesting is that the Indians, for example, have denied that there was any danger of nuclear escalation. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the CDS of India was in Singapore for the Shangri-La dialogue. He said there were many channels of communication within the Indian and Pakistani militaries, and there was no danger at all of a nuclear escalation. So, since you've been monitoring this very closely, how dangerous was the situation between India and Pakistan? And does the world have to worry that at some point the nuclear threshold may get closer and closer? What's the real situation?
Well, Kishore, the recent confrontation has been over discussed, both in the region and around. But I would
The
like
recent
to.
escalation is what? Sorry?
The recent confrontation between India and Pakistan has been over analyzed and over discussed. So I will,
Overanalyze, yes.
yeah. So I will look ahead in the future, and I will take a positive approach of of what the realities are and how you can prevent any kind
That's
of
right.
catastrophe.
That's right.
Yeah. So because we have 5 minutes, so I'll just take a positive approach. Now, first of all, uh, there are two there are two and a half of very positive developments, which are positive factors, which should be first of all converted into three, from two and a half to three. And I will say, first, India and Pakistan have an agreement signed on 31st December 1988, long ago, of not to attack each other's nuclear installations. And every year on the 1st of January, the two countries exchange a list of nuclear installations, even with everything else that's going on. This is the most preserved agreement between the two countries in order to prevent any kind of accidental war, so that you don't attack the nuclear installation, even by conventional means, not just by the nuclear means, but even by conventional means. So that agreement is there. Second, the nuclear warheads of India and Pakistan are not deployed. I just told you that the Americans and the Russians, out of their 4,000 plus warheads, they have 1,550 deployed. China has 500. Most of them are not deployed. A few may be, as per the American observer. But in case of India and Pakistan, most international observers, not me, I'm Indian and I could be biased, but all the American, Chinese, and other observers feel that the Indian Pakistani warheads are not deployed. So you can't have an accidental nuclear war because the warheads are not deployed. They are there, but they are not deployed, and they are not hair trigger. So that's it. Third, India. So I mentioned two. Now I'll mention the half. India and China have issued a no first use doctrine already. So I would say, if we can complete this third, which is half, into full, and if Pakistan also issues a new no first use doctrine, this third factor, which is half, will become full. Pakistan has nothing to fear because China, which is its ally and which is a much bigger country, has also issued a no first use doctrine. India has already issued no first use doctrine, unconditional. So if Pakistan uses no first use doctrine, it will change the atmospherics of the region, and it will then totally prevent a possibility of any future nuclear war. So I would say that could be the way to go ahead. And
no,
for
but at the same time, Sundeep, as you know, I'm a geopolitical realist.
Right.
Pakistan is the much weaker party in the Indo-Pakistan contest. The Indian economy is 11 or 12 times bigger than Pakistan's economy. And if you had an all-out conventional war between India and Pakistan, clearly India would have far more resources in a conventional war. And at the end of the day, the Pakistanis obviously will believe that the only thing that will prevent them from an all-out conventional war loss is to use the threat of the nuclear weapons. So from Pakistan's point of view, I see great difficulty in them agreeing to a no first use. How do you persuade them at a time when they are much weaker than India? why should they agree to no to a first use? What are the arguments, persuasive arguments you can use with the Pakistanis?
Well, it's very simple. If Pakistan uses a, a nuclear weapon, India
Mm,
will use in retaliation, because even though India has no first use, but Pakistan uses, India will use. And within matter of hours, half of India and all of Pakistan will be exterminated. I mean,
mm,
does Pakistan want to be open to that
mm,
possibility? And not only that, half of Asia will be affected,
mm,
not exterminated. I mean,
mm,
this option of not having no first use is not really an option, because then you are saying you are prepared for launching the first attack on India, but then also getting a second strike from India, and being totally exterminated, along with you exterminate Afghanistan, Iran, and all the way to Iraq or where else you don't know, or to
mm.
Israel. So this is not an argument, but I get the point you are making. It's a
Are you are
realistic.
you are you saying that if there's a nuclear attack by India on Pakistan, the radioactive fallout will fall on Israel?
Well, beyond Israel, it will go.
Really?
Yeah, all the way. It could go up to Europe. Well, not. I mean, there are environmental impact will go all the way further.
Hmm.
Health and environment. Some radiation will go up to Afghanistan and Iran, and
Hmm.
environmental impact will go all the way to Norway, depending upon how many nuclear weapons you are using, whether you
Hmm.
are using them, dropping them from surface or on the ground,
Hmm.
what is the wind velocity. It depends on many scientific factors, but that's a risk. It's a
Hmm.
serious risk. So, so I think it's in the interest of Pakistan not to be exterminated completely, just to
Hmm.
give one warning. But I get the basic point is geopolitical, and
Yes.
and more than that, it's psychological. I think India and Pakistan, at some stage, right now there is a lot of tension and lack of
Hmm.
total breakdown of trust. But at some stage in future, when things improve, they have to take.
How do you I know that you want to end on a positive note, and I share that desire. How do you break this sort of cycle of distrust between India and Pakistan? And is what's amazing is that India and Pakistan haven't had any kind of serious diplomatic dialogue at a high level for a long time. You see, they meet every year to exchange the information on nuclear sites, but they don't meet every year to talk about how do you build trust and establish a stable relationship to avoid another military clash. Why can't India and but this is the last question. What would you do in a positive way to improve the trust between India and Pakistan to ensure that we don't have the horrible scenario which you just pointed out of Pakistan and India being exterminated by this nuclear war?
Kishore, uh, it's a very important question for me. So a lot of people suggest that India and Pakistan could start taking some small steps to build confidence. That's not the
Mm.
way to go.
Mm.
That's not going to. That's not going to work.
That's not going to work.
That's not going to work. That's
Mm.
not going to work. Uh, and it's not Kashmir, or it's not Siachen, or it's not this or that. The critical question in the case of India and Pakistan is that they have to take a psychological and a political decision internally, that they accept the other country as a neighbor, to have normal relations, not necessarily
Mm.
loving relations, or over friendly relations, but
Mm.
just normal relations. The problem is that there are constituencies uh, in the countries internally who don't accept the neighbor
Mm.
as as somebody with whom they can have normal relations.
Mm.
So this is and there are some constituencies which are willing to accept it, but this is more question of internal dialogue within the two countries.
Mm.
So Pakistan has to decide once for all that 75 years are gone. We had this confrontational attitude. Uh, what do we want to do? I mean, why don't we just accept a normal adder? And same thing with the Indian
Mm.
side. India has to, different constituencies in India have to decide internally that
Mm.
let's focus on our economic growth. Let's be part of the uh, part of the
Mm.
global economic dynamic. and let's just have normal relations with Pakistan if they are willing to have.
Mm.
So, uh, so it's not about small measures here or there. It's a
Mm.
question of psychological uh, change, and
Mm.
that is possible. It's not impossible, but that's possible.
Mm.
Now, being an Indian, I know the Indian point of view on this, but the Pakistani friends or colleagues will have
Mm.
a different perspective. But I know that twice India decided to give this signal that we were willing to make a new beginning.
Mm.
One, when Prime Minister Vajpayee visited Lahore and stood in front of the Lahore, the Pakistan monument in
Mm.
Lahore. It was a symbolic uh,
Mm.
acceptance of the state of Pakistan.
Mm.
Uh, so that was one. Second, when the current Prime Minister Modi got elected for the first time in
Mm.
2014,
Mm.
he invited Pakistan Prime Minister and other heads of
Mm.
government uh, in the
Mm.
region to his oath taking ceremony to give an indication that he wants to make a
Mm.
make a new beginning.
Mm.
So at least from the Indian side, which I have seen closely, that twice efforts were made. Uh, they were not institutionalized.
Mm.
So there were efforts, there were signals given at the
Mm.
political level, but they were not institutionalized. So
Mm.
in the case of India and Pakistan, you need three things.
Mm.
You need bold political views if you want to
Mm.
break from the past.
Mm.
But only political moves will not be enough.
Mm.
You also need the institutional uh,
Mm.
mechanisms and institutional understanding and cooperation
Mm.
to follow up on the political moves.
Mm.
And third, you have to have the means of public communication like media and others
Mm.
to look at this in a rational long-term way.
Mm.
Finally, as India, we have to ask that look, we want to be a, a good economic player. We want to uh, make sure that all
Mm.
1.5 billion Indians have a good life, and that's
Mm.
what we want to focus on.
Mm.
And this confrontation in the long run is
Mm.
not whether it's worth it. I mean, I'm nobody to
Mm.
give an answer.
Yeah.
I'm just one of the 1.5 billion people. But this
Mm.
this we have to ask. And similarly, the Pakistanis have to ask this
Mm.
question. And once they decide, there are
Mm.
many solutions.
Mm.
I can tell you, there are many solutions.
Okay.
And the
Thank you.
solutions don't have to come from the West. They can
Yeah.
come internally, from within.
Well, I must say thank you very much, Sundeep. You've been very generous with your time and with your wisdom. We have covered an incredible amount of ground in this discussion, from what's happening to nuclear weapons globally, to what's happening on AI and nuclear weapons, to what could have been done to prevent the war in Ukraine, and now, of course, how we can help to improve relations between India and Pakistan. So thank you very much for being with us. We hope that we will have a chance to have another conversation with you in due course. So let me conclude by saying that the Asian Peace Talks podcast is produced by Dr. Varingoda Kesava Chandra and Ms. Kristen Tang and released by the Asian Peace Program, which is housed in the Asia Research Institute of the National University of Singapore. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kishore.